Hello and welcome back to Radio Odell, where I bring you all manner of good tidings from interesting people. I'm your host, Chris Odell. Alright everybody, today we have a returning guest, Antero Alli. I have to admit I had somewhat selfish reasons for having him back on because I've been feeling a bit of a sense of just sort of, I don't want to say disgust, but a heavy dislike for the way things are going culturally and politically and otherwise throughout the country and the world. I felt this a lot when I was a younger person, even before my teenage years, where just everything pop culture was just I couldn't stand it. And there were times where I thought maybe I'm just being a bit stuck up and trying to be cool by not being into pop culture. But then there's other times where you just look around and you go, everything coming out, the movies coming out, the TV, the books, the media, everything, and people's attitudes are just, I've got to find a way to isolate myself from that. And so I was talking to Antero, saying, boy, we got to have a talk about cultural isolation, how to cultivate that, how to also cultivate an experience for direct, I should say not an experience for, but how to cultivate the direct experience. Again, I think a lot of us get very removed with the internet and media being our sort of window to the world, and a lot of people forget how to just get out there and actually experience life. People, I've noticed, especially since this lockdown, not only is everybody polarized and turning on each other, but on top of that, people have kind of forgot how to just get out and experience things and be around people and have activities. People just seem like they're really losing it. I'm sure for a number of reasons. Probably everybody is on extra medication these days. Who knows what? Or maybe they need it. I don't know. But things are a little bit more messy than I think they have been in a long time. Certainly in my life. We also talked about in general then. What makes for good art, good movies, TV versus, sort of didactic pop culture, ADD level programming that we seem to be getting these days, and everything's trying to teach some modern political lesson versus actually tapping into the human experience and what I would consider good art, something that we can all relate to in a deeper way. Something that really gives you an experience rather than trying to lead you down a path and teach you whatever current ideology is being pushed. And we also talked about, in relation to that, Antero's new film that's coming out called The Alchemy of Sulfur, and that is going to be premiering. He's still up in Portland or outside of Portland, but that's going to be Sunday, November 7th at 7 p.m. at the Clinton Street Theater. And Antero will be there for anybody who wants to meet him and talk to him or see the film. And then after that, he's going to release it on YouTube for free, so you can check it out there. And as I've said before, it may not be everybody's bag, but I find them to be interesting films, just completely different. And sometimes it's an interesting little experience. And on top of that, I always admire his ability to. Antero's made a number of films, and on just a shoestring, tiny budget, but he has a message that he likes to. Well, not a message, but yeah, an experience, a vision that he likes to communicate, and he does a great job of it. And I find it interesting to watch. But I'm also an old film student, current film buff, all of that. So I love these things. And so, without further ado from me, we will get into the episode. This one, we did an audio-only call, so we'll just put up some images for you if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, you will have your audio. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to try and get to these episodes a little more often. I know they've been sparse, but I've been out living life. So I'll get to these more in the future, though, and I wish you all well. Okay. Well, welcome back, Antero. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Mostly good. Just getting through things, but staying busy and yet still finding time to slack off and play golf and other things that I enjoy. So we're just about to go into our version of winter here, which is pretty mild, even compared to yours. So it's
Oh yeah, that's going to be harsh.
yeah, it's gonna be rough. I mean, it's already getting down to, I don't know, 68 during the middle of the day here, so it's tough. But yeah, I'm actually ready for it. We had a nice long summer, and yeah, so it'll be a good switch for a minute.
There's a familiar sound.
Yes, that's Astrid. Yeah, who if you ever, well, when you see her, she looks a whole lot like Buddha did, just like a bigger female version of my old dog Buddha that some people are familiar with. But yep, she's definitely if someone comes to the door, that's an alerting dog. Big old German Shepherd Great Pyrenees mix. So she's a
Wow.
big formidable lady, but she's a real sweetheart. Yep, a lot of feminine energy in the house between I've got the wife, the daughter, and the female dog here. So I'm kind of
You're coping?
yeah, I'm coping. It's fun. Good stuff. So you've been pretty busy yourself. I know you're working on another book, and it sounds you just finished another movie. So you've been cranking away there.
Yeah. This whole kind of pandemic has really created more space and time for my creative stuff. And where I've gone with it is I finished writing 2 full books, and they're both. One was already published, and the next one, which I just finished about a week ago, it'll be available probably in a few months. Both books are out on the original Falcon Press. In addition to that, I somehow completed 2 feature films, in my own kind of underground style. But yeah, they're done, and the new one is going to be it'll premiere November 7th here in Portland, and then on November 11th, I'm going to post it on YouTube as a free view.
Ah, nice. Okay. Well, that'll be great because there's certainly, I'm sure a lot of people that would enjoy seeing it, but can't get out there or won't get out there. So that's good. Yeah, and in fact, I hear that even now that the theaters are open, they tend to be very barren. And I would love to go and enjoy a semi-empty theater, except hard to get a babysitter these days. Sometimes too, they're very busy. But that'll be interesting.
So I'm curious, did you get a chance to watch the new film?
I did. Yes, I just watched it this afternoon, in fact. So,
wow.
Yeah, I was kind of crunch time there. I figured I'd get it done before we had our call. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think you did, especially. I thought you did a very good job. The cinematography was excellent, and the music, as always. And there's like all of your films, even when I'm not necessarily hyper engaged in the exact story or content, or maybe a character that I don't like for whatever reason, it almost doesn't matter. There's something about your films where I don't know if it's a pacing, a certain feeling. They tend to make me not just think about what's on the screen, but I start going internal as well, and kind of having a little walk through my mind at the same time. And while I'm also taking in the art, and I don't know, there's a certain nice feeling about it that I enjoy. It's almost like a little meditation somehow.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of my intention and in my process is to, so I'm creating this piece of art or whatever, this cinema. But I think the real film is always happening inside people's head. I mean, this is why, you can have an audience full of 100 people watching the same film, and they're, on some level, they're watching 100 different movies.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. And there's certainly room to a lot of symbology and other things in your film. There's plenty of room for abstract interpretation. It's not all laid out in, nice little square corners that, trying to manipulate anybody's emotions necessarily. So it leaves that open for you, which is nice.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I hate that manipulative shit, movies that manipulate emotions. Yeah. Yep. No. In a way, it's been So I've been at it now for about 25 years. I'm making these little underground feature movies. And I finally getting to the place where I'm able to tell a story without explaining much, meaning more like show the story, follow the lives of the characters and their interactions with very little exposition. And so, in a sense, the people that tend to enjoy my films the most come at it with an imagination. And this is also why my films will never be popular, because I think that we live in a time, an era of kind of a widespread epidemic of imagination death. And, to be able to resuscitate your imagination, I think is a big deal. And so my mission in making films, and sometimes in the music I record with my wife, the overall, if I have a kind of an objective or mission throughout it all, it's to incite an insurrection of the poetic imagination in the viewer or the listener, so that perhaps if they come to the movie or they come to my art with imagination, but it's latent or somehow it's buried under a lot of literalist thinking or a lot of, seeking proof or this or that. And somehow I want to be able to, in my art, trigger an imaginative response. Oftentimes without them knowing it's happening, and then they realize, oh, I'm imagining something while I'm watching the movie, and that's exactly right. I'm out to stimulate the imagination. I'm not out to make sense. I'm out to stimulate the imagination and provide an experience more than just another idea.
I very much. I like that effect a lot. I'm noticing often in films that I enjoy, there is that, it's that sort of experience that I really, really like, that kind of just, there's a certain style that it just leaves itself open to that I find it's like taking a mind bath or something. I don't know. It's very, very comforting and nice and generally leaves me in a better place than when I walked in, and I do like that it triggers the imagination. It gets things going and out of a sort of crystallized rut of sorts of the mind that can happen in your day-to-day wanderings.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's like the other pandemic, the pandemic of imagination lobotomy.
Yeah, there's so much of that, and it's very interesting. So I've been, I'm raising this, daughter who is now 7, and I'm a big film buff and amongst other things, but I'm very careful about what media she absorbs and things. And it's interesting to me that we've been going back to mostly older works, in part because there's still something left to the imagination. There's still wonder and awe and there's a little more to be filled in there, I think, with a lot of the older films anyway, than there is these days. I look at a lot of modern media, and it's all very, it's didactic, or it's trying to manipulate you. It's what I can't remember who Joseph Campbell was quoting, but it was another artist basically called these sort of things pornographic, but not in the way of a sexual thing necessarily. But it's trying to make you desire or fear or manipulate you into something, and it's also just very plainly laid out. Like even these, you see these little mini films on social media that are clearly, it's like somebody sat down and said, how can we make middle-aged women cry when they watch this? All right, let's make this cute little heartbreaking film, but it doesn't really, I don't know, it somehow removes all imagination and just guides you down this little path. And there's something about it. It's just, there's a real dearth of good art lately.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments I have with most mainstream films, especially over the last, I guess, 20 years, is this inclination of corrupting the attention span. And this happens through multiplying the number of cuts in the movie, so that there are much faster cuts, and so the attention can't somehow breathe and move without being interrupted by yet another cut. And this kind of trend, I think, started actually with MTV and the music videos. They were featuring like these, basic music videos of, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes,
right?
But the really fast cuts. So there could have been like, 100, 150 cuts within a 2.5 minute, video, and it kind of conditions the mind into fragmentation of attention, and I think that it's not just MTV or the films, but there's an overall inclination in modern culture to corrupt the attention span. And I don't want to go into conspiracy theories, because I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, but I do know that people with small attention spans are basically much easier to control.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, whether or not it's fully planned out and coordinated, there's certainly a lot of that going on. It's there's a whole lot of that, and so
in my films, I don't have a lot of shortcuts. I have these really long, shots where I just don't cut. The camera moves around, but there's no cuts. And I learned that from watching the films of the great Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky, who's famous for these really long takes, but he somehow manages the camera in such a way that I never get bored. I never want it to cut into something else.
Right.
And so he introduces a cinema where you come into an expanded experience of time, what sometimes is called the long now, the sense of being present without interruption, just so the consciousness can experience continuity of consciousness. Yes. And I really like the experience of that. It actually helps me write books. I mean, writing books is one of the most difficult things I know how to do, because I have to have some kind of continuity of consciousness to know what I wrote 30 pages previous, so I don't repeat it again 30 pages later, so I need some continuity of consciousness just to do, the things that I do. So, but anyway, it's just something I've noticed in films, this kinds of too many cuts, too many fast cuts. Yeah. And so I've kind of rebelled against that in my own movies.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's one of the things that makes it so refreshing that way, and that's one of the things I certainly add about the older films, I suppose, too, is in general, people were more willing, or the people making the movies were certainly more willing to have those moments, and they gave it a moment. You'd watch a conversation or an interaction, and it was, maybe a little bit more like watching theater in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's something nice about that once you ease into it and relax. I've noticed it's very hard for people who are extremely attuned to modern media and hooked on their devices and things. It's very difficult for them to break out of that and just sit and have a moment. And so it's a tough thing, but I'm certainly glad that somebody's still working on that kind of art that allows us that.
Yeah, well, thanks. I think a lot of people are too, and I think part of it, is because of this, whether it's internet addiction or gadget or iPhone addiction or what have you. I think one of the tragedies of that, and I think about 20 years ago, you and I made this movie called Tragos, where you helped edit it. You were the main editor on it. Yes. And the whole premise of that movie, which I made as a kind of statement on what I saw as a contemporary tragedy, was the noticing of a certain loss in the capacity for actually having an experience. And where simulation of experience replaced the stimulation of experience.
Ah, yes.
And so I'm very keen on stimulating experiences rather than offering simulations, because there's enough simulation already. I mean,
Hmm.
most of what people absorb on the internet or on the news or on their phones are simulations.
Yes.
And the kind of the psychotic part about it, the crazy part, is that it's confused for actual experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's becoming so hyper real that I think it tricks a lot of people's minds that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does, and
Hmm.
that has its a whole lot of kind of horrific consequences just on an emotional level. There can be a kind of an emotional disconnect that eventually occurs, and even in its extremes, you get into these weird schizophrenic, schizoid kinds of situations where
Hmm.
you lose empathy, and and if you happen to be a kind of aggressive or hostile person to start with, you start, in a sense, even becoming like a sociopathic or psychopathic
Hmm.
personality.
Yeah.
There's a lot more of that these days. There's a lot more shootings. There's a lot more murders. There's a lot more crime, and that keeps escalating.
Yeah, just I think a social disconnect and division in general too. I mean, as much as we're going to get into this later. As much as I may not get along well with mainstream society and rarely have, I think it's even worse now because it's just everybody's off. I mean, we're all connected, but we're kind of off in our own little worlds. It's like everybody on a freeway. They drive like jerks when they because they can. They're in the little metal boxes, and we're all kind of doing that all the time now in a way. And yeah, it doesn't seem to go well with the human mind. I see a lot of people with all their neuroses really getting hyper accentuated from all this.
Yeah, I remember earlier on. I think it was maybe a week or two or three ago. In our email together, I had mentioned a phrase, cultural immunity,
Yes.
um, sort of as a way to address something that is of a constant interest to me, of cultivating cultural immunity.
Hmm.
And I wanted to just kind of share what I mean by that, because it's a really peculiar phrase, cultural immunity. What the fuck is that? What does that mean?
uh,
Um, and what I mean by cultural immunity, first, not just any culture, but culture that has become corrupt and toxic. It's a culture that I want to cultivate some immunity from that particular culture. So it's not any kind of culture. And to understand what I mean by culture, it's a very difficult word to define, but the way I've seen it and known it, um, as a proponent of subculture and um, culture that sustains itself. Um, so I view culture as basically an organic process that develops in the ongoing interaction between a populace or a tribe of people and their local womb environment, meaning where they are on the planet, where they're living by the ocean or by a mountain or on the desert. There are people, when they camp out, they settle into an area over the years, over the decades. There's this constant interaction with that environment that produces its own artifacts, through art and other kinds of technology and tools that are indigenous to that region.
mhm.
And so it identifies itself as a particular culture. And this is why, when you have tribes that are settled up into the mountains or in the deserts or by the seashores, you have culture that reflects the land and
Mhm.
the topography and in a sense, the power of that place. And
Yes.
what happens, I think, is that a culture becomes corrupted and eventually toxic um, when the connection to the environment is severed. And
Mhm.
it's just then the people that are just generating the static of their own story over and over again without any connection to, the life that they're living in, the environment that they're in.
Yes.
So a kind of disconnect from the earth then kind of pushes culture into a distorted expression where the interaction with the planet is no longer involved. It's just more of a kind of self-reflection, self-reflexive, having fun in your own echo chamber kind of life.
Absolutely.
Except that after a while, it's not so much fun anymore. It becomes a bit of a nightmare because it's very difficult to escape that. It's very difficult, if you're really super identified, in a toxic or a corrupt culture. It's a sad thing. It's hard to, escape. And there are ways to escape. There are ways to kind of burrow out of that or somehow transcend it. There are different, maybe it's through drugs or through different kinds of spiritual practices or certain, whatever it takes to, open up your senses again and come into a more direct experience of where you're actually living and rediscover your relationship to not just the land, but the power of the place. Each place has its own kind of spirit. And this is why certain activities will do really well in certain parts of the planet, but not all activities. So it's almost as if the planet has its own kind of energy or power that supports certain activities, and other activities don't do so well there. I learned this firsthand in a really peculiar kind of way. I was living in the Bay Area back in the 70s when it was a really cultural hotbed of experimental theater, dance, music. There was a lot of innovation happening there then, and I was busy writing and directing experimental theater works all throughout the 70s there. And I kind of got full of myself, around the 1980, 81, and I felt I really needed a break. I just was so, let's say, kind of burnt out. That's probably the best way to put it. So I moved to Boulder, Colorado, thinking I could continue my theater work there. And it became very clear, like just in the first 6 months, there was no way that I could do that there. And it wasn't like there weren't people that would want to do it with me, but there was just something about the energy of the place that there was no real theater happening anywhere. The theater there was maybe Our Town. It's a very conventional play, very conventional theater that could happen there. But the land or the power of the place, it didn't really support any innovation or experimental spirit of theater. And I really tried, and it just failed. It just didn't work there. And so it was really interesting to begin noticing how different places, and I jumped around, and then I moved over to Seattle, and I was able to do things in Seattle that I wasn't able to do in the Bay Area or in Boulder. And then so I've been jumping around and scoping out, in a sense, the spirit of the place. Meaning I had never really moved to a new area for economic reasons. I've never moved there to get a job. I've never moved to an area for family reasons. I've never moved any place to be closer to my family. It's always been moving towards an area where the energy or the spirit of the place feels like it's something I need to explore and discover, well, what can I do here? So that's my little rant on power of place.
Yeah, now that's interesting because I did have down that I wanted to talk to you about, rerouting or, how and why to move locations and how because you've been good at that. And it is interesting the reasons why you have. I mean, I've noticed myself in a bit of a dilemma because I'm finding that, I don't know. So I moved back to where I grew up here in the San Ynez Valley, and part of me loves it so much. I mean, it really feels like, wow, this is my home. This is the land, the air quality, the weather. I mean, everything just I love it. I just absolutely adore it. But I am having some difficulties with, let's say the culture in general. Not somewhat here. It wasn't as bad here, but when this whole lockdown and whatnot pandemic thing came around, it kind of exposed a lot of things that maybe I thought it was a bit more harmonious here, and it's not. And and it's just, there are things that I'm finding are encroaching upon my ability to even isolate from that culture, to be immune to it. Because let's say, for instance, something really hardline, like if they decide that we all have to be vaccinated to, go into certain public places, something like that. That becomes a real problem, and a corruption and a problem of culture for me. But then trying to just uproot and go somewhere else and get reconnected and integrated somehow, it seems like a real difficulty. And yeah, I'm having some dilemmas even just thinking about it. It's hard to tell when to hunker down and say, no, I'm going to try and be, a rock here and be some change and hold out, or or at some point you go, I can't abide by this. I got to get out of here and find something else.
Yeah, I follow you there, and it seems that your experience of almost like returning to the womb. The sense of, okay, I belong here. I was born here. I was raised here, and there's a real sense of comfort and assurance and safety there. And yet you have this other awareness of a certain, let's say, more conservative edge to the place that maybe you weren't anticipating. And then that might have some conflict with some part of you, which isn't innately as conservative as that. And so, and I understand too, I mean, the solution may not be as simple as just moving to the desert or moving to some other place.
Right.
But so really what you're going to probably have to do is do some kind of like some soul searching. And to, in that soul searching, to start rethinking almost everything. It just, the terms of your existence, in terms, like, for example, how is it that you're coming to know, safety? What is comfort really? What is that really for you? Or what is creativity really for you? And the issues of status or privilege, how do you, so you may have to, in a sense, not just rethink, but redefine these terms a little bit closer to the bone, a little closer to the essence of who you are. And that's where the soul searching comes in, is this is coming into who the fuck am I? And, how am I going to get a little more honest about what my actual needs are, unless I define them more clearly, more specifically.
Yeah, it's definitely become. I guess I've had some struggle with this throughout my life, where it and I have moved sometimes because of it. Like when I was younger, I just wanted to smoke pot in peace, and so I moved to the Bay Area where they left us the hell alone. And so I've done things like that. But I've always and then more lately. In a lot of ways, I've gone from the, well, gee, I almost want to move out to the country and homestead and whatever. But then I know, for me, also because of my vocation, or at least my way of somehow getting by in the world, I need to be integrated into society into some manner. I can't just go hermit out with the family and think it's going to work out, because that won't. So I sometimes struggle with that as a problem, how to essentially keep yourself immune from the culture and yet still integrate into society enough that you can be a productive member in some manner, so that you can continue your existence on this cohabitated ball of rock here.
Oh, there's a favorite saying, it's a Sufi saying, of kind of an aspiration to being in the world but not of the world.
Yes.
And
Christian
This is
statement.
yes, it's actually a pretty clear way in which I know myself, my own kind of experience, and the way I kind of conceptualize it. There's a certain image here of what I call verticality and the horizontal dimension. It's like if you can imagine a cross, which is a horizontal line and a vertical line. So I'm talking about kind of using the cross as a symbol for something that represents the way I live my life. I'm crucified on this cross I'm going to talk about now.
Okay.
And so verticality to me refers to a sense of who I am, not in relation to the world, but in relation to my own experience of spirit. And verticality literally moves down through my body, through my spine, as a column of energy. You can use the chakra systems as a reference there if you like, but I experience it as a vertical column that comes down from above, down through my crown, through my body, and down into the planet below. And I also experience the planetary energy coming up through my body and up my spine and out the crown of my head. So it's this simultaneous column of vertical energy coming down from above and up from below. Anyway, there's this kind of verticality is what I call it. And I align my consciousness with that verticality. And then when I'm out in the world, I'm able to witness what's going on, but I'm not sucked into it. I'm not hooked into the horizontal feeding frenzy of everything that's going on around me with this, the world out there. I can appreciate it and, navigate it and interact with it. But who I am is more aligned, with the verticality experience that I'm talking about. And so it's in a way, it's a definition of integrity for me. Vertical integrity is, I guess, the way I would put it, of how to interact with other people through a position of vertical integrity. So I'm not trying to suck them into my trip. I'm not letting them suck me into their trip. I'm simply interacting across the board while sustaining my own, connection, my own internal connection with who I am. And I don't have any image or idea for that. I don't, this is not a self-image thing. It's more of an experience thing of, navigating the world with my verticality intact.
That's a very interesting way to describe that, and I could see how, and people would have different ways of describing that for themselves. I imagine from different either spiritual or otherwise backgrounds, but I think that's a good thing to point out there.
Well, what's interesting is a couple of years ago I ended a 40-year career. I don't know if it's a career, but it was a 40-year era where I was directing groups in what I call paratheatrical experiments or group ritual dynamics. And it was a training process, basically. And it's a training process to introduce the people in the training to the experience of their own vertical integrity. That's basically where the training starts. And what I discovered about 4 out of every 5 people that joined into this work, and there are hundreds of people that went through the work over the years, but 4 out of every 5, the whole notion of verticality was completely foreign to them. They didn't get it. They didn't understand it. But once they were able to align with it, not everybody was, but those that were able to align with it, there was some kind of light that went off in their psyches, or that it was a kind of a life-changing or a kind of a game-changing event for them, because they somehow found a way to start interacting with the world without getting sucked into the world. So, it provides a level of autonomy, let's say a new kind of freedom for interacting with the world without getting bent out of shape or totally broken by the world, which is, can be, can happen really easily to anyone who's either lost connection with the verticality or just never discovered it yet. It's still latent.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. One, I think there are very few things that help people with that anymore. I mean, I think that was a lot of the purpose, I think, in some ways, of mythology, the various religions and mythologies, was to somehow connect the inner with the greater, and yet, leave you as an integral, as a subject with your own integrity, but still able to then go and interact with the world because of how you could understand and have a relationship with the universe, God, what be it. But so many people have lost that because a lot of the religions have become corrupted or useless with modern exposure and other problems. And people have just kind of lost. Yeah, they're just kind of adrift. So I think, there's
a lot of that drifting thing happening right now. I mean, it's really amplified, with the whole social distancing and the whole lockdown or whatever. There is a sense of suspense. Nobody really knows what's going to happen next. And the fact is that nobody ever really knew what was going to happen next anyway. It just becomes more obvious now. We don't know what's going to happen next. Yeah. And that raises a higher awareness of uncertainty and the incumbent anxiety that, comes as a reaction to the escalating awareness of uncertainty. And uncertainty and anxiety, they're not the same thing. Uncertainty is simply a fact of life, Anxiety is just simply it's a natural response of the nervous system to reaching your threshold for how much uncertainty you can permit before you start behaving like a nervous monkey.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of nervous monkeys running around right now.
It is. It's true. Yeah, and some of them even have guns.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, or worse, political power. But it's,
absolutely.
That's what. That's been bothering me a lot. It's just it used to be if somebody was just ignorant or willing, didn't like to think a lot and was willing to be led along by culture, whatnot, then, well, okay, fine, but they generally were harmless. But now everybody seems to be very aggressive and willing to impose their particular fears or problems on each other. I mean, I think this whole thing has really exposed that, and that concerns me greatly. I don't mind if my neighbor is just, I don't like what they like and whatnot, but when they start to say, well, guess what, you've got to live under my exact sort of rules, otherwise you're ostracized from society entirely, that bothers me a bit.
As it should, and I think all the more reason to somehow find your own version of what I'm talking about when I say verticality. So you don't have to get too bent out of shape. I mean, it's important to be angry and you have important emotional responses to your autonomy or your freedom being violated, because this is happening every day.
Right.
But this whole notion of how do you navigate these volatile times without going crazy yourself, without becoming so bent out of shape that you lose your peace of mind, or you lose your capacity for love, or you lose your capacity for even having an experience, without it immediately, being shut down by fear and paranoia.
Very true. Yeah, I know I had to disconnect even more. I mean, I'm compared to a lot of people, I think I'm fairly unconnected to social media and my devices, and I'm not really up to date on the news, that's for sure, and things like that. But I found even with my limited exposure, I had to cut that down even further in the last year or so. I really, really cut it out because it was just, even with whatever level of control I had, I couldn't help it but tainting a lot of experiences where I'd be, nearly enjoying a moment, and then oh yeah, but this thing and that, and when are they going to take this away? And just, yeah, it becomes it becomes a bit maddening, and I think I just felt burnt out after a while, even if it wasn't making me lash out or do certain things. It was just exhausting after a time, especially after like the latest election and other things. It was just, I finally said, all right, I have to back off. I'm not doing any good here. And it's frying me out and unconnecting me from, those things that are important, that verticality.
Yeah, good move. I mean, to withdraw, that was, I think, that important thing. 'Cause otherwise, you do to kind of get burnt out on it, and it's just, a lot of kind of, you start eating your own crap in a way, almost. It's not fun. One of the things I wanted to just introduce here, we've been talking about these topics. It kind of reminds me of the first book I finished writing over these last couple of years. It's now in publication. You can buy it. You can find it at the original Falcon Press. It's called State of Emergence, and it's subtitled Experiments in Group Ritual Dynamics. And it's a distillation of, about 40 years of experience in working with groups, towards a kind of very, how can I put it, a very physical, somatic, but dynamic approach to restoring the capacity for experience, and also restoring the sense of verticality that I've been talking about, so that, you can navigate the world, and the volatility of the era and so forth, without being completely swept away by it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Good. That's one actually I haven't read. I'm not sure I've seen that one, so I'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, I think it's big, trying to get people back to being able to have that direct experience of things is really, it's definitely important in this day and age. Like we were saying, nobody's experiencing much of anything directly. I have to watch that myself, because especially I still love my films and things, and so which is good, because I get to experience and see a lot of things, and thoughts and art that I wouldn't otherwise. But there are definitely moments where I go, boy, I seem to be really into these movies about somebody living a rural life with no devices and enjoying nature and and I'm going, well, yeah, but I'm sitting here watching it on a big screen TV in the luxury of my fancy living room, and it's good and bad, but there's definitely a danger.
I appreciate those experiences too, watching a film on the big screen TV. And I also know that, in doing that, anytime I engage in a film, I enter a kind of trance. It's its own kind of hypnosis, right?
Yes.
And in order for me to kind of honor my capacity for experience, I have to be accountable for breaking the trance, breaking media trance, basically. And how I do that, I get out, I walk through the forest or down by the river pretty much every day. And I find that if I can do that every day, it's a very significant, it's only for an hour of the whole day, I mean, anyway, it brings me back to life, so to speak. In a very real way. But it also creates a transition away from the media, because if I'm not making that transition, if I'm not doing something to break that trance, just because the movie is over doesn't mean the trance is over.
True. Very
I
true.
can, the movie's over, and I can, look at my wife, and I can still be in the hypnosis of the film and not even have any notion of where she's coming from or anything.
Right.
And, we can have an argument, and I realize, oh shit, I'm still in the movie.
I have actually had, there are some people that take it a step further. I don't know if I've ever told you, but I've had my wife Maria sometimes. She gets so into a film that if a male character that she somehow identifies with me does something bad, she will get upset at me, especially if she's been drinking too much. She somehow loses that barrier, and she'll get pissed off at me. And I go, babe, it's the guy in the movie. I didn't approve of this. I didn't write it. In fact, he was the bad guy. Calm down.
I know. It's simultaneously really funny and really sad at the same time.
Yes, it is, and it can be scary.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
So yeah, it is a thing. I think we all have to yeah, watch that and find a way to break trance. I find myself sometimes going on too much of a string of things because I'm always trying to, even though I would say most of my media, I'm either trying to learn or have an experience that opens my mind, something like that. I'm always trying to make the time worth it that I spend on media. But that being said, I will still sometimes watch a movie and then, maybe watch a half hour little TV show before bed. Oh, and then I'm putting on an audiobook when I go to sleep. And then I wake up and I got music. It's just constant media input. I might not be on social media, but I'm constantly having some kind of input, and I have to be careful of that in particular. And I mean, maybe for me, that's part of what I think golf is that if I know that I will succumb to those things if I'm sitting around the house too much. Whereas if I say, you know what, I'm getting out, I'm going to go golf, I'm going to have a 4 hour, walk in the manicured Zen garden like nature and play a sport where I'm engaging my body, that pulls me out of it nicely. So it's one reason I think I need to, maybe I'm a little obsessed with that too, is it helps me break.
No, that's an excellent example. It's similar to my, getting out every day, in the forest or down by the river. It creates a transition out of kind of media head or whatever it is that you were doing in the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
something I wanted to bring up in this new movie. It's called The Alchemy of Sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be released on YouTube November 11th. If you put The Alchemy of Sulfur into the search engine of YouTube, you'll probably find it, or you go to my website at verticalpool.com, you'll find it. But anyway, it's a story about this woman she's a writer, and she is having a problem with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend is having a problem with her because she's, according to him, creating these crises in the relationship to spur on her creative writing process. And the boyfriend gets to the point where he's just really tired of you creating all these crises just so you can fucking write, and so he's like out of it, he's done, goodbye. And she's heartbroken, right? And she says, oh shit, I didn't want it to go that far. And so what she does in response, in an attempt to escape heartbreak, she writes herself into a story as a romantic character that falls in love with a central character in the story she is writing. She's writing the story for a magazine, actually. She's a professional writer. And she falls in love with the central character in the story, who is not just a figment of her imagination, like every writer, imagines characters in their stories, they're figments of their imagination. But this character is also an archetype, meaning he has agendas of his own, and he pulls the woman's consciousness into a whole different place that somehow has these very unpredictable consequences in her real world life. That I won't get into, but it's a really interesting thing that sometimes happens when people escape pain or try to escape heartbreak into fantasy. They go into some other, whether it's media or whether it's some kind of fantasy or other kind of personality that they're developing for themselves or whatever, some sub-personality. But anyway, she's an artist. She does this as part of her, creative writing process. But it somehow acts as a kind of unintentional voodoo or an unintentional magical act that backfires in her real time life. So when she takes a break from her writing, she encounters individuals in her real life that then act on her in very particular ways that end up as part of the story she's writing. And it just kind of snowballs into a kind of, let's say, a kind of marriage or communion between her mundane daytime existence and the imaginal dimension that she is in the process of writing, so that there's this almost alchemical, let's say, merging of opposite dimensions. Hence the title, The Alchemy of Sulfur. Sulfur refers to the fire element, or the element that is able to purge through fire, to cleanse through fire, the element of fire. And so she undergoes a rather significant transformation, but it's not by her own doing at all. It's the result of much larger forces acting on her as a result of being triggered, through this story she's writing. So that's about as best way I can describe it right now. It's a very trippy film, The Alchemy of Sulfur.
Yeah, that was a good description without giving away anything, any huge spoilers or whatnot.
So did you get some of that when you were watching the film?
I did. Yeah, actually, I did, absolutely. Yeah, so that was I appreciate your description, because that's pretty better than I could have said it. So, but yeah, there was definitely that going on, and it was it was very interesting to watch and watch it develop. I liked it. It took a minute to build for me, and then get past okay, I'm getting to know this character, and do I like her or not? Does that matter? But the way it builds up, I liked, and I could kind of feel it coming, but also because I know your style of filmmaking, and I've sat there with you in the editing rooms enough, so I could kind of feel it coming around in the end. Oh, here we go, we're building up to something here, and it was so it was a lot of it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
What did you think of those two witches that she met in the forest?
They were cracking me up. Yeah, I know. And it was good. And of course, since I know one of them as a regular outside of movie person, it's always a lot of fun to see her acting. So yeah, I was pretty amused. But yeah, there's always a character or two like that in your film. So yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, because you have a feel and sort of themes that kind of repeat, but yet your movies are totally different. I mean, the plot is never anywhere near the same, really.
Yeah.
So
this one's pretty different.
Yeah, which is a lot of fun. I like it, because I never know exactly what I'm going to get when I sit down and watch one of your movies. So it's always an enjoyable experience that way.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm very impressed that just from a technical level, how much you're able to do pretty much, nearly as a one-man show there. I mean, you're shooting it, you're editing it, you're writing, you're directing. It's quite a bit, and probably on a shoestring of a budget.
Very much so. And I learned pretty much almost everything I know about editing was sitting next to you for over 15 years.
Well, you learned a lot, because I really didn't really have any editing notes. If I had to get really technical, there were a couple of audio points that I would have cleaned up, but some of it I could tell was just because that's what you got and you had to work with it. So, I was impressed. I thought you did a really good job, which actually brings me to one of my questions I was going to ask you. I'm surprised I haven't asked this before. Maybe I've forgotten. How did you come to learn and to write? Books, plays, and then you ended up teaching yourself essentially to do, to produce and direct theater and films. What even started you down the path? You wrote your first book. I know you didn't. I'm fairly sure you didn't go to school for any of it.
No, I didn't go to writing school.
Right. It's not our way. I know. I can relate.
Let's see. Oh man, it's to make a really long story short. During my teens, I underwent a very dark period that followed an episode. I don't know if I told you this before, but I was kidnapped at the age of 15 and groomed by a psychopath to join him in a life of crime.
Interesting. I don't know if you have told me this before. I thought I'd heard all the interesting stories. It gets better. All right.
Yeah. And so, wow. I was 15 years old at the time. This was back in the late 60s. I ended up basically putting him into prison. We were working the crime circuit, the two of us. He was training me how to break into houses and steal things and stuff like that. And the law caught up with him, and then the law caught up with me, and I cut a deal where if I testified against him, I wouldn't go and go to prison.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty extreme place to be as a 15-year-old kid. And I came out of that in a pretty deep depression. And what I did during my depression, oh God, it's one of the worst things anybody can do when they're depressed, is I started smoking this new drug on the market back then called PCP.
Oh, yeah.
Basically horse tranquilizer.
Right.
And I didn't smoke a lot of it, but I smoked enough of it to put me even deeper into a depression than I had been before.
Yeah, we tend to do that. Dig a hole.
So I got into a pretty dark place. And the place I got into was also extremely isolating, meaning I kind of lost touch with my ability to communicate what was going on to other people. And I was just feeling very alone in the dark, so to speak. And the one thing that kind of saved me was starting to read these radical comics by Robert Crumb, Zap Comics, right? I was reading them, and it just kind of blew me away, the artistry and just the way that, he would create these scenarios, these panels of images and characters and stories that inspired me to start, drawing my own cartoon panels and writing my own stories. And so it came out of that. And then I would show these to some of my high school buddies, and they will go, whoa, wow, I really like this. And so I was very kind of encouraged. So I kept doing it, and I got better at it. And then there was just something that just clicked into how can I put it? It just kind of clicked to this act of writing as a way to basically restore my sanity. Writing as a way to get out of the dark, writing as a way to get out of isolation, writing as a way to communicate to other people what it is I was going through. And it was huge. It saved my life, basically. The only other option I would have had if I didn't draw cartoons would probably, to kill myself at that time. There was no other way, no other option. Because, it was a suicidal place. Yeah. And, one thing went to another. I started, getting out of high school, I started writing plays. And I wrote a series of 7 plays that I then auditioned actors for and trained them if I needed to. And then we produced the plays in Berkeley, California, and some of them were toured up the coast of Mendocino, California, or in Sonoma, and, places like that. And then I went from writing plays to writing books. And then I went from writing books to writing screenplays. So it was just this kind of development over the years that started in a very dark place, where writing became a kind of a do or die scenario. And there's always that spirit in my writing. I still have that, the sense of, publish or perish kind of situation. And so, it's weird. Almost everything I've written has been published, for example. And which is kind of odd because I don't really keep private journals. I don't write things where, I don't want anybody to see this. It's more like, if I write something, I want everybody to know about it. It's this weird exhibitionistic thing. And so that's the way it's gone. It's simply been part of an ongoing, process of psychic survival, probably the way I would put it. Yeah.
That is very interesting. And I have more on that, although I've got to say that interesting little parallel to that I don't know if I've ever told you, but when I was 15, I had an experience where a person that was actually he was kind of, I guess you'd call him a game master, a GM in a role playing game that I used to play. Turned out that he did some thieving on the side, and he had kind of recruited some of our group, and I'd heard about it, and I more approached him because I thought somehow it would be kind of cool and fun to get involved. And yeah, and I had gotten into some things involving that. Now I got out of it because I realized it was a mess real quick, but and before he got in trouble, which was shortly after that. Now to be clear, I didn't say anything to anybody about it, at least not at the time, before he managed to get himself screwed up because I saw something. Actually, he was working with younger people that were just very sloppy, and I even warned him. I said, they're gonna mess up, and you're gonna get locked up for this." And lo and behold, he did. But kind of a funny thing, yeah, same age, and
Yeah.
and actually, yeah, my friend. Well, Peter, our mutual your acquaintance or friend,
Yeah.
and my friend, and he made a whole movie kind of about it because I described it to him once. I think I was on acid or something, and he asked me a lot of questions about it, and he made a more fantasy version of it called Fagin's Children. But it was yeah, it was an interesting time and close to one of my darkest times too. It wasn't long after that where I was doing some of the worst of my drugs and for the wrong reasons, and kind of just went into a downward spiral till actually I ended up in jail for a week for other reasons. But yeah, that's a funny thing. It's interesting to hear you say that.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Now, if you're going to include it in the interview here, everybody else will know too.
Yeah, right. No, I will. It'll be interesting. I've admitted at some point, I think we're well past any statute of limitations, so I should be okay. But yeah, it's one of those things where I barely got out of that, without getting in some really, really nasty trouble. I didn't do anything terribly horrible, really, but but still, yeah, it was a messy time and not a great thing. So yeah, but I unlike you though, I did not find. I think it took me quite some time. Well, I found a way out through a little bit through editing and film. That was a bit of, but I wasn't really creating so much as recreating. I guess, yeah, through editing and whatnot. Although there was definitely some creativity involved. But yeah, I've always struggled with writing in particular, and that's part of why. I still, to this day, writing emails is like pulling teeth for me, and it's a big part of my current job, and which would lead me to, how do you, when you have to do things in your life that, let's say, you don't enjoy. I know you've probably created your life in a way that to make sure that you have enough purpose in everything you're doing, that probably most of what you do does not cause you trouble, but I imagine there must be things in your life that you really don't enjoy that might be part of the process of making your art or whatnot. What's your method for getting through those things, man? For me, for instance, it's emails and even sometimes, like, I love talking to you on this podcast, but the actual act of the technicality of producing it and getting it done is I find that very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of the illusion of writer's block. And I call it an illusion because it's based on this weird entitled assumption that writing should be easy. And, it's always been the most difficult thing I know how to do. That I've gotten better at it simply as a testament to me not avoiding the difficult. So I've endured enough difficulty in my life to realize that oftentimes the most difficult things end up being the most valuable to me. And it's not just the difficult, because some difficult things are meaningless. People can get. I've gotten involved with things that are really hard to do that are totally useless and meaningless, and I wonder, why am I doing this? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
So it has to do with discovering, well, what is the meaningful difficulty? What is the difficulty that's actually going to bring value and meaning to my existence?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a difficulty I can live with, and I will adhere to that, and I will follow it through. And that's, I mean, the whole thing of follow through, of being able to start something and complete it. That's what I mean by follow through. Requires a muscle of commitment that I've learned to value simply because I've seen the outcome. I've seen, that without the force of commitment, without being able to increase the force of my commitment to whatever I'm doing, nothing gets finished. So I'm about finishing. If I'm going to start something, I'm going to finish it. And this is why I'm always, before starting anything, I'm always reluctant to start it, because I know once I start it, I'm going to finish it, because I'm just wired that way. I will finish what I start. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm, when it comes to starting, I'm not always right there. I'm just like, oh, okay, do I really want to do this? Mm-hmm. And I have to look at the outcome. I have to look at all kinds of things, because once I jump in, I'm in, for the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's wise. I mean, I've definitely heard, I can't remember if it's Mark Manson or a few other folks, but say something like, if it's not a hell yes, then it should be a no. It's kind of a, be careful what you go into, because if you're going to go into something, you should, really commit and do it right. And that's certainly something I'm even trying to teach my daughter. It's like, all right, if you're going to play golf, then let's play golf. Obviously enjoy yourself, have a good time, but focus, you don't have to be serious, but be sincere. I
like what you said about the hell yes part, because, without that kind of energy and without that kind of enthusiasm, you can risk getting into something and just doing it, kind of half-ass, and you end up in this kind of, mediocrity swamp, where you realize, oh my God, I've gotten into it, but I'm not really into it anymore. I'm bored, or I'm not, then it gets you just leave projects half done.
Yeah.
And these kinds of loose ends, that's another thing. I don't do well with loose ends. Anytime I'm aware of a loose end, whether it's social, intellectual, emotional, whatever, I just tie it up. I don't like loose ends. I want to tie them up. And what that does is it allows me, it just gives me more perspective of, what is going to be worth following, what is going to be worth, diving into. Loose ends are power drains, the way I experience them. And for me to accomplish anything as large as like a feature movie or writing a book, that takes a lot of energy to do that. It takes a whole shitload of energy. Mm-hmm. And if I haven't figured out how to plug the drains, to somehow expose how I'm draining my power, there's no way I'm going to be able to finish these large projects, because I'm draining my power along the way. It's not going to get done. Yeah. So I this is where I search out for the loose ends and tie them up before moving forward.
Yeah, that's a smart move. I know for myself, when I have those things in my life, it bleeds over in strange ways. And again, I'll go back to golf, because for some reason golf seems to expose every sort of, weakness or mental or otherwise problem I might have at any given point in time. But I mean, even so much as if I don't get my work done that I know needs to be done, or I'm kind of halfway in a project, I should have responded to that manufacturer and made sure this was going right. If I don't handle that and I go out on the course, I don't play as well. And it's just because I know there's something, it is like an energy suck in the background, and it does not go well. So I've been struggling with that for sure.
That's great about golf. Your awareness of what's going on there with golf and how it shows you so much. It's not just about getting out there and swinging a club. Like you said, you discover your weaknesses. You discover places that need work. You discover places where you have some skill or ability. You have it just brings up a whole lot, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I know people who have golfed a long time, and they go on about that. They said it's not just about golf.
Yeah,
You
I think
know.
if you're open to it, there's a lot there, and it a lot of people close themselves off, and some people I wonder why they even play because they just go out and they spend money and they get pissed off and that's that. But you certainly learn something about them, even if they're not learning much
Yeah.
about themselves when you play with them. So, but
Yeah, maybe we're not to play them.
yes, there's a lot of that. Like, okay, yeah, let's avoid that. So, yeah, it's a very it's an interesting thing for sure. So, yeah, I've been having to watch it lately because I do sometimes I overbalance on the go. I don't want to deal with all the little things that, especially in my case, like I said, I really don't like being on the computer, and I've noticed the older I get, the more I stare at a screen, my brain starts to completely melt, and so it's tough because to do my job correctly, I do need to be on emails and doing things until I can afford to, maybe stand there and dictate to somebody do it. But yeah, so it's tough. But I will leave sometimes too many things there, and yeah, go off and golf, and then it's a mess. So I'm actually in the process now these last month or two just trying to get back into just get back to work, get these things done, tie up those loose ends, and do my sort of the same skill that I use in editing, just apply that to work and life. So yeah, but boy, yeah, I can't wait till we get to a level where emails. We have something better than emails. I don't know what it's going to be, but I need something, something
Yeah.
that.
Well, how about telepathy?
Yeah, right. I think I would settle. At this point, I'm going. Well, I wish I could just. I need to invent like a plugin where I can do really low res, Mad Max looking style videos that I can send to people where I'm talking instead of
That'd be
actually
cool.
typing. Yeah, I keep thinking about that. I'm going. There's got to be a way. So, and one of these days, that's probably how I'll really get rich. I'll invent some plugin, and
Yeah, I like
it'll.
that.
Yeah,
That's a great idea. You got to do it. You got to do it.
I should, because some of us are just much better at speaking and audiovisual. So,
Right.
because I staring at text.
It's more creative too.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. Yeah, although I do wish I'd sit down and write some more too. I think there's a lot to be learned from sitting down and writing. Although there are days I think I should actually get a physical typewriter for that. It might be easier on the eyes.
Oh, yeah, I can relate. My very first book was written completely on an IBM Selectric too.
Yeah, that's fun.
And yeah, it's wild. I mean, I didn't have any idea that it was going to be published, so I published it myself. And if you get a first edition of my first book, Angel Tech, you'll see that it's all written on IBM Electric. Anybody that knows the font will recognize it.
That's great. Fun stuff. I mean, it is nice what we can do now in terms of going back and editing things very easily is nice. But yeah, I still haven't come to terms with text on a screen yet for some reason. But I'll get there.
So was there any I don't know, final thing you wanted to discuss or get into before we sign off here?
Yeah, I think we're coming close to it. The only other thing I wrote down is kind of just a side little question, and I think we've gotten into some similar issues. But so how do you? I'm sure, I don't know. Especially you're a bit older than I am, and how have you come to? I don't want to say control time, but to really make it so that your life doesn't just fly by you and you miss a lot of things. Do you have any particular tips or things that you do to make sure that you're actually, when you're sitting there and enjoying a meal, you're actually paying attention to what, mindfulness of a sort, I suppose?
I think it comes down to the capacity for having an experience. People who are somehow, if you're disconnect from that, if you live primarily in your mind, in your own head, for a long periods of time, it's very easy in that space to feel as if your life is slipping by, because it actually is. How I, gosh, what was the question again?
Well, it started as more of a how do you control time so life doesn't fly by, but it's also more of it is an experiential thing, because I always relate it back to just being able. A lot of times I can gauge my life by how much I enjoy a cup of tea or a glass of wine. Let's say it's very easy to get caught up and you're just going through things and you go, "Wow, I didn't even I didn't even really notice how amazing that was," or something that maybe brought you joy and you really used to appreciate. You're not doing that anymore, and I think a lot of times that comes because you're going too fast somehow. But
it's an interesting question. I think what you're talking about is the subjective experience of time, and how that can dilate or expand so that you're actually having a more palpable sense of, okay, I'm actually living my life. This is the time of my life. This is not time according to my watch, with 60 seconds a minute, 60 minutes an hour. No, there's actually another parallel timeline that has to do with, my breath and my movement through space, my movement through time. So the subjective experience of time, I think, can be regulated. And this is kind of an experiment, what I'm suggesting here, is to see if you can, for just like a minute or maybe 2 minutes, start small. Go a minute without naming or labeling whatever it is that you're perceiving. And see what happens. One of the ways in which I've understood and that I understand attention is through two different kinds of attention, what I call first attention and second attention. And first attention is that awareness that's linked to the thinking machine and the automatic assignment of labels and names and also meanings to whatever is perceived. And this is kind of like the default attention that I think society runs on, because it has to. It's a survival-oriented attention.
Sure.
Then there's a second attention, is what I call post-survival. It's not really concerned with survival agendas, and it's usually not accessed unless you're in a kind of either artistic or sometimes schizophrenic dimension. You're not really worried about survival. And so the second attention refers to that awareness linked to presence, energy, phenomena, without assigning labels to it or meaning or names. So the second attention simply refers to an interaction of seeing, not labeling, just seeing, to be able to see. And each of these attentions come along with their own subjective experience of time. Time for people who are more or less trapped in the first attention, where they can't stop labeling everything, they can't stop naming everything. Everything has meaning to it. They're always assuming meaning and projecting meaning. These are the people whose sense of time will tend to be more constricted. And they may, what comes along with that is a kind of claustrophobic sensibility of almost like feeling trapped in their bodies, that they can't escape, material existence is closing in on them. And, it can be also a paranoid place as a result of that. And if you can shift into the second attention, even if for a few moments, you'll find that your experience of time itself radically changes. It's not the same experience of time that you would have if you're paying attention and labeling everything, or projecting meaning onto something. And the thing is that first attention is mechanical. It's automatic. It's just automatically assuming, oh, I know what that is, and this is what that means, without necessarily actually knowing what it is or actually knowing what it means. It can be blind, in other words. And so, between the two attentions, there can be a more interactive relation between them so that they can work together. So it's not like, I'm advocating, well, you got to leave the first attention behind and live entirely in the second attention. You wouldn't want to do that anyway.
Has its own problems. Yeah.
Yeah, that's called, purebred schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm, right.
And there are plenty of individuals demonstrating that, and their experience of time is nil. There is no time in their world, and they are hooked up to eternity for the rest of their dying days.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to communicate with those people.
Yes.
And it's very difficult for them to communicate, and this is part of what creates the schizophrenia. But a little schizophrenia goes a long way. I mean, if you can find a way of just simply escaping the thinking machine and coming into a more direct experience of things without immediately labeling it or having to know what it means, there can be a kind of a relief. There can be a kind of relaxing, finally, that you can relax the grip of anxiety over your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very, very good. Very good. I love that, and I'm going to just leave it be there. I think that keeps along a thread that's kind of been going throughout the discussion, and it's wise words. So I think we'll call that a done episode here, and we'll save more for another time.
Sounds good. I feel done.
Excellent. Well, it was wonderful again to talk to you as always. And for everybody looking to check you out, I think going to verticalpool.com will probably lead them pretty much to all of your work. Is that right?
Yeah, they're going to find out more about me than they want to.
Okay, good. Sounds like that's what the internet's for. So excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Antero, and hang around. We'll chat after this recording as well.
Okay.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Radio Dell. If you want to find out more about the show or myself or our sponsoring company, you can head on over to chrisodell.com. That's CHRISODELL.com. And just a little word about our sponsoring company, since it allows me the time and then the freedom to be able to do this podcast. That is a company that I started back in 2007. It is a hemp gear company. And what does that mean? Basically, we have bags and clothing and all sorts of other different accessories and fun things made with primarily hemp textiles, which are antimicrobial, breathable, of course very sustainable, but we don't get too hippied out about it. It's just good, functional stuff, good for you, good for the planet, whatnot, and we just try to make some really interesting and useful things. So I hope you go check that out, because that does help support the show. That's at dsgear.com, dsgear.com. And like I said, you can find a link to that over at chrisodell.com as well. Thanks again for joining us. Be seeing you.